In this video, we'll see how to create an automated sales assistant in n8n. It's going to perform a BANT analysis, which is a sales framework for qualifying leads based on their budget, authority, need, and timeline. Then it will calculate an overall score for each lead and bucket them into low, medium, and high priority. The workflow will then create personalized emails according to priority group. The highest priority leads will be informed that a solutions engineer will reach out to them within 24 hours to better understand their needs. And they'll also be provided a scheduling link to select a time that works for their schedule. Medium priority leads will be informed that a solutions engineer will reach out within a week to better understand their needs. And low priority leads will be informed that their inquiry has been received and then pointed to some self-help resources to see if that might solve their problem. This is lesson 4 in our n8n crash course. If you're new to the series, this video will be self-contained, so you don't need to watch anything else, but you can go back and watch earlier lessons if you want more context or just to learn more about using n8n. Alright, so in the last video, we learned how to automatically categorize form submissions, and then we learned how to automatically route inquiries to the right branch for handling. So let's get started building out this branch that handles sales inquiries. This is a good time to talk about a good design technique for your n8n workflows. So we have this initial flow here, and then we'll be routing each request to one of 3 distinct branches. So these branches are not going to come back together. They're each going to be an isolated branch that handles one component of this workflow. So what that means is in the future, we might want to encapsulate each of these branches into its own workflow. So what we should do is prepare for that ahead of time. We're going to anticipate our future needs and build to accommodate them. n8n has this concept of sub-workflows, so you can execute a sub-workflow from a branch, just like this. But sub-workflows only receive their direct inputs, and they can't reference nodes earlier in the workflow. So what do I mean by this? We can see here I have a simple parent workflow. So when I click execute the workflow, it first sets variable 1 to be equal to 1, and then it sets variable 2 to be equal to 2. And then it calls this sub-workflow. We want the sub-workflow, when triggered by the parent workflow, to set a variable called total that will be the sum of the 2 values. So I can go back to the parent and execute the workflow, and then if I click call my sub-workflow, I can view the particular sub-execution that this called. And we can see here it only accepted var2. So there's no way to calculate this total because that variable was set in a node that comes before the node that's immediately before the sub-workflow. So when we call this sub-workflow, it only receives the variables from the node immediately before it, as we can see here. So why is that relevant to our workflow? If we want to prepare for the future and make sure we can convert these different branches into sub-workflows if need be, we need to prepare for that. And so what we need to do is basically design an interface. What do I mean by that? So this switch node effectively just behaves as a pass-through in terms of inputs and outputs. So it decides which branch to route to, but in terms of what it actually routes to that branch, it's simply just the output of the node that comes before it. So if we click on the switch here, we can see the node that comes right before it has this category and summary. And then on the output, we can see the different branches for the switch statement, and it routes to the appropriate branch those same exact variables. So what we're going to do here is we're going to map the variables that we'll need in each of these branches to a set interface, and we'll reference only this interface in future nodes. So let me show you what I mean. Right before this switch statement here, we're going to add another set node. And I've called this node rename fields for interface adherence. If I go into this node, what I did here was determine all the information that we'd need in each of the branches and then give them a standardized set of names. So we have the category of the inquiry, which in this case is sales inquiry. We have the summary. We have the inquiry itself. And then we have the contact information of the person who submitted the claim. And then finally, we have the inquiry submission time, which we'll need later on. So now I can go ahead and replay this, and we can see the output of the switch branch is all of that information that I just defined. So now if we need to reference this information in a branch, let's say we want to prompt an LLM again, what we're going to do is if we need the name of the person that submitted it, we're not going to use this value here because this is a node whose information will not be available to a potential sub-workflow that we create in the future. So what we're going to do is use only this switch statement. So we have that information here in inquirer name. So this switch node is effectively acting as an interface. So all of these branches, which may become sub-workflows in the future, can reference information from earlier nodes that they will not have access to if they do indeed become sub-workflows. So let me add a little bit of color here to highlight what I mean. So this color kind of helps clarify what's going on. We have this initial isolated component of this workflow, which does some sort of work. Then we have this routing in between. So this is where we define the interface and the information is passed through to each of the sub branches. So now we have a branch here for sales inquiries. We'll have one for support inquiries, and then we'll also have one for general inquiries. So now for each of these branches, if we access any information from earlier nodes, we're going to only refer to the switch statement. So I hope this explanation was clear and you understand why it makes sense to do this ahead of time so you can design your workflow for the future. And I've added some comments in here just to document all of this reasoning. So with that out of the way, we can go on to build our workflow. The first thing we need to do is perform our BANT analysis. As I mentioned before, this qualifies leads according to specific explicit values, like their budget, their authority to make a decision, a specific need that you can help with, and then a timeline that they're looking to work under. We're again going to perform this analysis with an LLM. So again, we're going to be doing this with a gradient AI serverless inferencing node. If this is your first video in the series, I'll add a timestamp to a previous video so you can see how to set this up and get an API key for yourself. So I'm going to go ahead and delete the support inquiry information here, and then I'll add in my BANT analysis. So if I open it up here, again, we're using our credential from before. We're going to be submitting text, so we just need a text completion. And I'm going to be using Anthropic's Claude Opus 4 again here, but you can select any model you want. And I'll add another promo code in the description, so the first 50 people who redeem it can get some free credits to try this out. And here is the actual prompt we're providing. We tell the LLM that it is an expert sales development representative AI assistant, and its purpose is to analyze inbound sales inquiries with precision and objectivity to help the sales team prioritize their efforts. We then tell it to analyze the following sales inquiry with a BANT analysis, calculate a lead score, and provide a summary, adhering strictly to the scoring rubric provided. So we're doing a 1 through 7 score here, where for each of the BANT qualities, a lead gets a 1 if it's not mentioned or hinted at, a 2 or 3 if it's vaguely implied or hinted at, a 4 or a 5 if it's mentioned indirectly or stated with some ambiguity, and a 6 or a 7 if it's stated explicitly and clearly with specific details. The output requirements are a JSON block, so it provides its analysis in this object where it gives a score for each value and then a justification. And then we provide the inquiry information. So here we add the inquirer name, the company, the contact, email, and the inquiry itself. And again, we're using this JSON shortcut here, which is shorthand for the input from the previous node. And that's so we only reference values from this switch interface. So I'll add a note here about that. And now we can execute this step, and we can see it returns the JSON. So now we need to parse this string and turn it into an actual object that we can use. And we did that in lesson 3. So again, I'll add a timestamp if you didn't see that before, but I'll run through it quickly again here. So we add this code block and we copy exactly the code from this previous string. So all we're doing is parsing the value. So in this case, you can see that the return value from the LLM was not a pure JSON string, but it's a markdown JSON block with the JSON string inside of it. So that's why we have this filter here to pull that out. And we can go ahead and execute this step. And now we can see that we have an actual object that we can work with. So now the initial BANT analysis has been performed. We can see that we get 3 7s for explicitly stating a budget, clearly articulates specific pain points for a need. And then for a timeline, we made specific claims about migrating before the holiday season rush. In terms of authority, we get a 5 because the user identifies as a lead developer who's been tasked, and he's putting together a formal proposal for the CTO. So he has significant influence, but is not the final authority, so we get a score of 5 for authority. So the next thing we need to do is calculate an overall BANT score. So we're going to add a set node, and I've named it calculate overall BANT score. And all we're doing is we're finding the average of these scores. So we take each of these values from the previous node, the budget score, the authority score, the need score, and the timeline score. We add those all up, and then we divide by 4. So if we execute this step, we can see that we get an overall score of 6.5. So now we have our overall score, and we can respond to the inquiry appropriately. And we're going to respond differently according to different priorities. So let's do that now. We're going to add another switch statement. And here we're going to have 3 routing rules. And again, we're going to make sure to add a fallback output, and that output will just hook up to an error node. So here, we're going to want to be taking the overall BANT score, and we're going to make our calculation. So first, this score is a 6.5, and we can see here this little symbol is that it's numeric, not a string. So what we need to do is switch to numeric comparison here, and then we'll go is less than or equal to for each of these options here. So if the overall BANT score is less than or equal to 2, we're going to categorize this as low priority. If it's less than or equal to 5, we will classify it as medium priority. And if it's less than or equal to 7, we will calculate it as high priority. So we can execute this step, and we see that we get a high priority item. So the reason we did it this way is because these rules will be evaluated in order, and the first one that it satisfies will be the branch that's executed. So if we did is less than or equal to 9 here, and we executed this step, we're actually not going to get a high priority classification here. We're going to get low priority because it's the first branch whose condition is satisfied. So it's not going to satisfy every branch that meets this condition, but only the first one. So I'm going to change that back to 2. So by doing it in this way, we're seeing if a value is less than or equal to 2. And if it's not, then we can check to see if it's less than or equal to 5. So this way we know it's going to be either 3, 4, or 5 because it's failed this initial comparison. And same thing when we get down here. We're checking to see if it's less than or equal to 7, but since it didn't satisfy any of these 2 conditions above, we know the value is either a 6 or a 7. So that's how we're doing it here. I'm going to rename this switch to determine lead priority. And then before we move on, I am going to set a stop and error if we get a priority that is somehow not within these bounds. And I'll change this to BANT priority error. And the message will be an invalid BANT priority was assigned. All right, we're going to go ahead and save. And now if we execute this, again, we can see that we are on the correct high priority branch. The next thing we're going to do is formulate our emails based on priority. Again, we're going to use an LLM here to automatically generate the reply. I've created 3 more gradient serverless inferencing nodes, 1 for each priority level. So I'll go ahead and hook these up now. So let's take a look at each of these prompts. For the low priority, we tell the LLM that it is a sales development representative AI assistant, and its purpose is to respond to inquiries that have been determined to be low priority by BANT analysis. And the task is to formulate a response email personalized according to the user's inquiry and make the response sound professional but warm. Then we provide the information, again, only referencing the switch statement and no nodes before it. And then we add our output requirements. Return only the formatted response email with no preamble or other information, and then we provide an example output. We thank them for their interest. We acknowledge that we've received it and are reviewing the details. And then in the meantime, we point them to some self-help information so they might be able to find the answers to their questions. And then we give clear next steps, requesting more specific information if they'd like more help. For the medium priority, it's almost the exact same thing, except it's a little bit more personalized. And then we point them to a pricing calculator so that they can estimate their potential costs. And then the high priority email is pretty similar, but we say to generate a personalized response email that conveys urgency and guides the lead toward booking a meeting. The response must set the expectation for a follow-up within 1 business day, 24 hours, and then we provide the relevant information. So here, acknowledge that we've received their inquiry and we're excited to learn more about their project. And we inform them that a solution specialist will be reaching out personally within the next business day. To expedite the process, we allow them to book a time that works best for them directly on our calendar, and then we inform them that we look forward to connecting. So now our workflow is automatically generating response emails for each of the sales leads that comes in. But how do we control this process a little bit better? We're not providing the LLM with a lot of information about our company or what we do or our brand. So we wouldn't want to send out a bunch of automated emails that aren't really grounded in any way. The way we'll get around this is just by providing the LLM with that documentation. So what I'm going to show you next is how to load documents from Google Docs so we can provide them to the LLM to keep its responses grounded and factual. We could always define this in the prompt itself, but it's better to use a Google Doc because that way we can update our branding guide or our company information in one central document. And first of all, it's just accessible by people, not only n8n, but also because that will allow us to update our documentation and then have it automatically update across all of our workflows. So since we're dynamically pulling this information in at every execution, we don't need to worry about hard coding something into our prompt and then forgetting to update it if we update our branding or our company information. We're going to have to set up a project in the Google Cloud Console in order to do this. We're going to want to add this information before we formulate our email. So I'll go ahead and add a Google Docs node here, and we will so we need to connect a Google Cloud Project credential. If we click Create New Credential, it will provide us with a link to the documentation to fill out this information. These directions are really well written, and we can just run through them to set up a project. So first things first, we need to create a Google Cloud Console project. So log into Google Cloud Console, and then you can create a new project. I'm going to name mine n8n course. And then you're going to want to make sure it's activated up here by clicking on this and selecting it from the list. Next, you need to enable APIs. So go to this hamburger menu, APIs and services, and then enabled APIs and services. You can click enable APIs and services, and you can search for APIs and services, and you can add them here. So we're going to add the Google Docs API. So search for it and then click enable. We're going to add the Sheets API, which we'll need later on. So go ahead and click enable. We are going to add Gmail. which we will need later on. Hit enable. And then finally, we're also going to need Google Drive to enable Sheets and Docs. So hit the Google Drive API and go ahead and click enable. Next, we need to configure our OAuth consent screen. So go back to APIs and services and go to OAuth consent screen and just fill out the information. We're going to click get started, n8n inquiry agent as our app name, and then we'll add our email for the support email. The audience, you can make it internal or external. I'm going to go ahead and click external. And since only we'll be using this, we don't need to worry about verifying our app. We're going to add our contact email and then finish. Now we need to create our Google OAuth client credentials. So click clients, create client. We're going to click web application. We're going to name it n8n inquiry agent. And then we're going to add a redirect URI. And to find that, we're going to go back to our n8n instance, and we're going to copy this from our credential setup. So go ahead and paste that in here and click create. And now you can copy the client secret and paste that into client secret. And you can copy client ID and paste that into client ID. Again, you can restrict domains if you want to, and then this button will pop up, sign in with Google. Now, before we click sign in with Google, I mentioned earlier that this is an external app that has not been verified. So what we need to do is add our email to the list of approved users. So still in the Google Auth platform, we're going to go to audience and then add test user and just add your email here. You can click save and now go back into n8n and you can finally click sign in with Google. So make sure to select the account that you just added as the test user. And it's going to warn you the app hasn't been verified, but that's okay. So click continue and then give it access to the relevant permissions that it wants. So click continue and we can see the connection was successful. So I'm going to rename this n8n inquiry agent and click save. And now we can select the document that we want to load. So I'm going to go to my Google Docs and open up these two documents. So I have a brand information and a company information document. I just generated this with LLMs, so this is not accurate and it's just for the purposes of this video. But we need the ID of this document to load it, and that is right here. So after document/D, we copy this code here up to the next backslash. So copy whatever yours is here, and I'll add this information into the GitHub repo so you can use this exactly if you want to. But I'm going to go ahead and copy this, and then we're going to go back to n8n and paste that doc ID. You can also just copy the URL, and I'll show you that next. So this will be get company information, and let's execute the step. And we can see we got the company information. So next we just need to add one more. So go back, Google Docs, get a document. We're using the same credential, we're getting a document. I'm going to cut off these URL parameters here, and then I'm going to paste that in. And we're going to execute that step, and we can see the brand tone was loaded. So get brand information. Also, we could have loaded these in parallel. So we could have loaded these like this, so they load in parallel. You might need to do that for really large files or requests that take a long time, but these are pretty short, so we're just going to do them in sequence. And now we are going to update our email prompt. So we're going to go back in here, and under this information, we're going to add these two sections. So here's company information on the company you represent, and here's information on the overall brand tone. So I'm going to copy this, and I'm going to paste it into our other two prompts here. And then I am going to save, and I'm going to pin this output here. And then I am going to click play, and we see we got an error here. So since I added two nodes in between, again, I referenced this node via JSON, not its actual node name in these switch comparisons here. So I'm just going to replace those. And again, this is a good reason that you should reference by node name. And I actually think when you drag in like this from the previous node, so if I go here and drag this in, it uses JSON by default. And that should probably change for this reason. But anyway, let's fix this. All right, so now if we execute this step again, let's see what we get. So here we have this output email. Thank you for reaching out. We're thrilled to learn more about your project involving migrating your application's backend infrastructure to a more streamlined and cost predictable solution. And then all the information. And that looks really good. So a couple of things here. Again, we have these like formatting strings showing up. So we're gonna need to make sure to remove those before we send this email. And again, you can try out different models for this. So I've been using Opus for this project. So I'm gonna go ahead and use that. And again, that's a really nice thing about the gradient node here is that you can just select any of these models and kind of play around with what works best. So let's see what Opus responds with. And we can see this output is better. So even though this output is better, it's not guaranteed to be perfect. So what I'm going to do here is add another node to verify that the email is appropriate. So we're going to merge these emails together, and then we're going to verify the email is appropriate. So I'm going to rename this to funnel email branches, and now we can verify the email is appropriate. So here's the prompt we're using. If the following email block is not ready to be sent as is, remove any artifacts or indications that it was not written by a human, and return only the formatted email text so that it may be sent out. Here's the text in question starting on a new line. And then we put this in. So that's one of the reasons we had to add this merge node here. We could have directly connected each of these outputs to this gradient node here, but we need a consistent node to reference in order to inject that into the prompt. So if we didn't have that and we used a specific node name, it would only work when that branch is executed. So that's why we need this merge node here. And we'll have a video on going over all the different ways you can merge data in n8n coming out soon. So now I'm going to make sure this data is unpinned, and I'm going to click play. And we can see the email was good before, and it just passed that right through. So now the last thing we need to do is actually send this email. So let's go ahead and click this plus here. We'll add the Gmail node, and we will send a message. Now, even though we're going to use the same API key, we need to create a new credential because this is technically a different node. Luckily, we did most of the work beforehand, but again, we're gonna have to go back and create a new key. So we're gonna go to the Google Auth platform. We're gonna go to APIs and services, credentials, and then we're going to create a new credential here, and it's going to be an OAuth client ID. Again, web application, we're going to do n8n inquiry agent, and then Gmail. And then we're going to add redirect URI, and again, copy that info over, create, and then again, we're going to copy the secret into n8n. Save, sign in with Google, and hook up your account. Again, click continue and hit accept on the permissions, and that will connect successfully. And while we're here, let's just go ahead and create the Google Sheets one that we're going to need in a minute. So go ahead and just do Sheets, Google Sheets. We're going to append row in sheet. Again, click create credential, and then do it one more time here in the Google Cloud Console. So now we can go back into our email node. We have our credential. We're going to send a message. Remember, don't go before the switch statement. So we're going to go to switch, inquirer email, contact email. Going to rename this RE, your DigitalOcean inquiry. The email type is going to be text, and we are just going to drag in this email content from the previous node. And now I can click execute step, and we can see the email was sent. And if I open up my Gmail, we can see it right in my inbox. So your DigitalOcean inquiry, thank you for reaching out to DigitalOcean. Our team has received your inquiry, and we can see the message here. It's specific and personalized. It mentions some of the stuff that was submitted in the form, and then it informs the reader that a solution specialist will be reaching out along with the calendar to schedule. So we can see here at the bottom, we have this attribution. This email was sent automatically with n8n. You might not want people to see that. So just as we saw before in the form submission node, we can go over here and go into send a message, go to add an option, append n8n attribution, and turn that off. So if we execute this step again, and I go back to my email, we can now see the same message, and there's no attribution on the bottom. So our workflow for this branch is pretty much complete. We've been routed a sales inquiry. We performed a BANT analysis, calculated the average score, got some documents from Google Docs, and then used those documents along with the initial request to make a tailored email response. We've verified that the email is appropriate, and then we've sent it. So the last thing we're going to do is just update a central reporting doc. So we can see I have this sales lead document. So this is a document that sales associates would keep an eye on and check every morning to see new updates. And we can see information about the inquiry. So let's automatically update this spreadsheet with all the relevant information. So here I have this append node. And if I open it up, you can see that we're using the credential we made earlier. And we'll be appending a row to a sheet within a document. And we actually don't need the document ID like we did before. We can just load it here. So from list, and it will list out all the documents you have. So I click sales leads, and then the sheet is leads. So down here, the sheet is named leads. And then we're going to map each column manually. So the names of these columns do not match the names of the attributes in n8n. So we're going to manually do that. So here I actually need to change all of these to switch because the reference node actually comes right before the switch statement. So now we're adding the contact name, the company name, the contact email. We're adding the initial inquiry so the sales agent can see that. we're adding the overall BANT score as well as each of the individual columns. And then we're adding the time that the inquiry was made, because remember, we made commitments for high priority leads for a 24-hour turnaround time and medium for a 1 week. So we add the automated response time, which is pretty much going to be now. It might be a little bit off. And then we're going to add the automated response email. This is so that the sales associate has some context as to what's already been said and what's already been communicated to the sales lead. And then we are going to add a follow-up by time. So here we have a conditional statement. If their overall BANT score is above 6, we do right now plus 24 hours. If it is above or equal to 3, so this would be medium, we are doing now plus 7 days, and otherwise it's not applicable. So we could change these comparisons to mirror the structure, like the less than 2, less than 5, less than 7 structure for determining the priority when we were sending an email. But I just did it this way because the default case then is this not applicable. So let's go ahead and run this node. And then if we go back to our sheet, we can see all of the information. So we have John Smith from Amazing Company, and we see his original inquiry asking about migrating his application's backend infrastructure. We see the BANT scores, 7.775, and then 6.5 overall. And we see the inquiry time. And then we see the automated response time, and then the response email. And finally, we see to follow up by the date given. So this is 1 day from now. So the very last thing I want to show you is adding a wait here. So if someone sends an email, we might not want to immediately respond to them, especially if we're trying to make it seem like a human might have written this. So what we can do is add a wait node in here. So I'm not going to wire this up because I would have to wait for the amount of time when I'm testing the execution to show you guys. But I'm just going to show you how you do this. So this wait node would go right before you send the email out. So I'm going to leave it above just so it's not confusing. And then we can click on it, and we will resume execution after the time interval. And here we can click the unit and the amount time. So we could set this to a fixed like 15 minutes, but that might be a little bit obvious. And if they send us multiple inquiries, they might catch on. So what we can do is change this to an expression and do something like math.random, which will give us a random number between 0 and 1. And then we could do something like multiply this by 10. And this will give us a random value between 0 and 10. So now we'll respond randomly between 0 and 10 minutes. And then we could always do something like add 5 minutes. So now it's between 5 and 15 minutes. So this is a good approach, and the response times will be distributed evenly across that. So you're just as likely to get a response in 6 minutes as 10 minutes as 14 minutes. Or we could do something even more complicated. So if I do this expression here, it's pretty similar. We have this plus 6. So the minimum time is 6. And then we have times 16 here, so that is a 16-minute range. So this would be 22. So we're going to answer between 6 and 22 minutes. And what I'm doing here is adding 2 uniform random variables between 0 and 1, and then I'm dividing by 2. So this will again get a random variable between 0 and 1, but this time it's going to be centered around 0.5. So we're more likely to respond in the middle of this range here. So 16 divided by 2 is 8. And then we'll add 6 to that. So on average, we're going to respond about 14 minutes. And as you get further away from 14 minutes, we'll be less likely to respond in that amount of time, with a hard cap at 6 and 16 minutes. So this might be confusing. If it is, don't worry. But the overall concept I just wanted to show you is that you can add a wait to make this seem a little bit more natural. So now we have our entire sales handling pipeline set up, but this isn't the only type of inquiry we might receive. In the next video, we're going to build an AI agent that uses a retrieval augmented generation pipeline that will connect to our company's documentation to automatically answer product questions. So jump on over to the next lesson to keep going.